I'm I'm at a loss for words at this point, Crimson Tide fans. I just don't know. I don't know. I need one word from you though down in the comments. What is your one word reaction to the loss to the Aggies of Texas A&M, an unranked team? Nick Saban losing to one of his prior assistants, pupils, whatever you want to call it, for the first time in his career. Jimbo Fisher upsets the number one team in the country in the Alabama Crimson Tide. And let me know your one-word reaction to the loss to the Texas A&M Aggies down in Texas, in College Station to be specific. I'm pissed. I know you're pissed. Let's get back to this recap real quick right here on the Alabama Football Report. Welcome into the Alabama Football Report. I am your host, RC Maxfield, and if you are feeling the same thing I am right now, you are pissed off at what Alabama did down in College Station against the unranked Aggies, a team that had no business even really being close to Alabama in this one. The Aggies win 41-38 against the number one team in the country. They won't be that much longer, as now the Georgia Bulldogs will move up to number one. And who knows how far Alabama falls after this one, as really when you're looking at the stats, and we'll talk about a little bit more in depth later on in this one, Bryce Young had a pretty solid game outside of a couple throws here and there, right? 28 for 48, 369 yards, 3 TDs and 1 interception. I actually thought he looked pretty good, just mostly because, well, the offensive line didn't really do him any favors whatsoever. He was sacked 4 times going in to the fourth quarter, and really just he held the ball a couple times too long. But overall, I thought the offensive line just did not do Bryce Young any favors whatsoever in this one. And there was a couple of throws, again, where Bryce Young showed that he was human. But overall, he was a guy that kept them in the game. He hyper-targeted Jameson Williams, who we'll talk about here in a little bit. But overall, I thought Bryce Young played really well. It's just, man, that run defense is infuriating. But before we get into this deep recap here, where we're all just a little pissed off after this loss to Texas A&M, use hashtag RollTide in the comments to get questions answered on an upcoming show. It'll be a mailbag. I want to answer some of y'all's questions, and I know y'all will have a ton of them after this really just unprecedented loss for Alabama down in Texas in College Station against an unranked Texas A&M Aggie squad that was with their backup quarterback, starting a true freshman at center and right tackle. Just super uncharacteristic of this Alabama and Nick Saban program. Let's talk about the offense real quick in this one, who, again, as I mentioned, looked pretty damn good. Now, to be fair, they did have to throw quite a bit in this one since they were playing from behind. I thought Brian Robinson Jr. played really well as well, and he is the clear-cut number one running back, and we know who the number two running back is now as well. But when it comes down to it for me, what this Alabama offense will lack on the offensive line will be their downfall. Simple and plain. You have Evan Neal, who is arguably the best offensive lineman in the country. Outside of that, there's really no consistency on that offensive line when your right tackle is getting beat day and night, every play it seems like, and Bryce Young is having to step up, maneuver around the pocket, roll out in the flat, do crazy things that a quarterback shouldn't have to do. There is an issue on the right side of that line that needs to be addressed. The left side, I'm all right with, but the Alabama offensive line could very much be its downfall if it wants to get where it really wants to, and now there's no room for error, right? You have one loss. There is absolutely no room for error for Alabama if they want to win Nick Saban's 7th national championship down in Alabama. I mean, when you look at what happened tonight, there's no other reason but to blame the offensive line for the offense's downfalls and the pressure that Bryce Young had to navigate in that pocket. Overall, he looked good, but the offensive line has to improve. Shout out to today's video sponsor, BetUS. Go over to chatsports.com/TideBet and use the promo code TIDE125 to get the best deposit bonus on the internet today. I'm using it, and you want some of my NFL picks, producer Trace? Let's put that up on the screen. There we go. On this one, I've got the Titans -4.5 over Jacksonville. I got Buffalo and Kansas City with the over on that one, and I know what you're thinking, RC. Buffalo has shut out 2 teams this year. Well, those offenses have nothing compared to Kansas City's and Patrick Mahomes. I got Washington covering against New Orleans, the Panthers also covering against Philly, and then I've got the Dallas Cowboys covering -7.5 against their NFC East division rivals in the New York Giants. Again, head over to chatsports.com/TideBet and use the promo code TIDE125, and you too can make some of these bets. I know you probably don't want to bet on Alabama after how they made you feel tonight. If you're listening to this on Sunday, last night, again, go over to chatsports.com/TideBet and use the promo code TIDE125 and get the best deposit bonus on the internet today. I promise you won't regret it. I'm using this deposit bonus that I got from last year, this year still. It's the best one in the game. There's no reason to even go look around the internet for it. Go to chatsports.com/TideBet and get that promo code TIDE125. Jamison Williams, how about this? I'm talking about a guy that really didn't show much in the first half and then just got hyper-targeted in the second half against Texas A&M. And you could argue he was really the only reason that the offense stayed in the game against the Aggies in this one. 10 catches, 146 yards, and 2 TDs. He is the clear-cut wide receiver one for the Alabama Crimson Tide. You got John Mechie. You got other guys in JoJo Earl as well. Jamison Williams is clearly the favorite target of Bryce Young when it comes down to this, right? He's a guy that can really take the top off of the defense. He can go across the middle. He can go into the screen game as well. There's really nothing he can't do, and we're really getting to see his talent on display against the Aggies, and hopefully he gets hyper-targeted even more because you love what you see from this guy, and he's made an impact right away on this offense, right with Bryce Young, and man, if it wasn't for him down in College Station, I don't know how this offense in terms of the wide receivers would have looked because there wasn't a lot of explosive plays outside of him that has to continue moving forward, especially with the lack of consistency in John Mechie as well as JoJo Earl and other guys in that wide receiver core really showing that they could take the top off of the defense as well. RB number 2 has been solidified, and he had 2 catches for 28 yards and a TD. He also had 2 carries for 3 yards, and the reason I bring him up, Jace McClellan, is out for the year, and it looks like Roydell Williams will be the number 2 running back moving forward for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Didn't see Trey Sanders tonight. There you go. It sounds like you have your answer at the running back 2 position for the Crimson Tide moving forward. I thought it was going to be Trey Sanders, but instead, you have Roydell Williams. I loved his aggressiveness on that first touchdown for Alabama in the flat where he just really had no regard for human life, as Marv Albert would say in basketball, and just took a dive into the end zone for that first touchdown for the Alabama Crimson Tide. I want to see him used a little bit more, but you love what you see from the running backs position, specifically Brian Robinson Jr. He can carry that load. So Williams will just come in and really be that guy when he needs a breather, maybe some Gatorade on the sideline moving forward. Malachi Moore was ejected early on in the first quarter for targeting in this one, and his presence was felt in terms of lack of it in this game. I mean, they were targeting guys that he would have been guarding all game long. You got to tip your cap to the Aggies in terms of looking and seeing where the Alabama secondary was struggling. Losing a guy like Moore was impactful, but the biggest takeaway for me in this one is, and I've been saying it for years at this point, the targeting ejection rule has to change, right? I am okay with player safety. I am pro player safety. I think everybody is, right? Watching the game of football, it's a violent game. But at the same time, there needs to be a flagrant 1 and flagrant 2 type situation for this, right? You do not need to be ejected for the first targeting call you get unless it's just absolutely egregious, right? Avante Burfict from Cincinnati Bengals type days, right? This wasn't an egregious targeting. It should have been a flagrant 1. He should have been playing, and maybe this was a different outcome for Alabama, but unfortunately, targeting, you get ejected in college football right now, and it needs to change. But I want to hear your opinion on this. What you think? Does the targeting rule need to change? Type Y for yes, type N for no. I'll be honest with you. I think this game would have had a very different outcome if Moore was in it, as really Texas A&M was just hyper-targeting the right side of the field, and it was paying off for them. And, I mean, that's where Moore was playing. You don't have Moore. Good for them for hyper-targeting them, but you have to change this rule, NCAA, in terms of ejecting a guy on the first targeting call. It is absolutely ludicrous. Speaking of ludicrous, well, the Tide's defensive line has to get better. I put Mathis up here. He was a guy that played all right throughout the D-line, but overall, it's just infuriating at this point when it comes down to what is the major issue for the Alabama Crimson Tide on defense. We all know what it is at this point. It's the run defense. And tip your cap to Spiller, right? And they adjusted a little bit, did the Crimson Tide. But overall, I mean, when you face a team like Georgia moving forward, This is going to be a major issue for this Alabama defense. Looking at the number against Texas A&M, they only had 94 yards rushing, but a lot of that came early, right? And then they realized, oh, we can win on the outside where Malachi Moore is no longer there. And so that's where Calzada started to throw. They took advantage of it, but if Moore was still in the game, I would fully expect that rushing total to be over 150, 175 in that range, because let's be honest about it. You can't perform like this when it comes to run defense against a team like Georgia, because they're not going to have to pass the ball with Stetson Bennett, right? Their backup quarterback right now. Who cares if JT Daniels is in the game? You have to be better on run defense if you're Alabama moving forward, and that just has to be guys stepping up and making impactful plays. I only heard about Will Anderson Jr. a handful of times tonight, and he's a guy that I've come on previous videos and said he's the best defensive player in the country. Things have to change when it comes to this run defense moving forward, because if you're going to face the likes of Georgia and get to that ultimate goal with really no room for error now that you lost a really cupcake matchup down in College Station, things have to change now on that defensive line. And I want to hear from you guys on this, because the defensive line is really the biggest flaw on the defense in my opinion. But I want you to grade the Alabama defense as a whole versus Texas A&M. A, B, C, D, or F. As a whole, I'm probably going to go with a C+ on this one, just because I thought there was some positives on there, but overall, it has to be better. It just has to be. You're facing a backup quarterback in Calzada for the Aggies, and you're going up against an offensive line that is starting 2 true freshmen, as I mentioned previously. Things had to be better. They weren't. You didn't capitalize on opportunities. You outgained them on offense, and your defense just struggled all game long. Tip your cap to Jimbo Fisher to some degree, but adjustments were needed and weren't made for the Alabama Crimson Tide on defense. One more time, just a reminder, if you have a question, ask your question with hashtag #RollTide to be featured in our mailbag video coming up later this week. There should be a lot of questions after this debacle down in College Station, and now there is no room for error for the Crimson Tide moving forward if they want to win the national championship again. And man, I just want to hear y'all's comments down in the comment section below. Be sure to use hashtag #RollTide on that. Again, Alabama, the #1 team in the country, at least for a couple more hours, but won't be tomorrow when the new AP poll comes out. The Aggies upset the #1 team in the country, 41-38 with a demoralizing loss. Bryce Young, solid. Offensive line, not solid. Defensive line has to be better, and just a lot of improvements need to be made if Alabama wants to win that 7th national title for Nick Saban. But before we get out of here, you have to look forward, because there's not too much positive in terms of looking back right now after losing to an unranked team. Who you got next week, Alabama or the Bulldogs of Mississippi State? Man, this one feels disgusting, because Mississippi State just beat the Aggies 2 weeks prior, and now you're having to face off against them, and man, just absolutely disgusting. Let me know down in the comments, though, if you have Alabama beating Mike Leach and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Once again, 41-38, down goes the #1 team in the country, the Alabama Crimson Tide in College Station, Texas, to the Texas A&M Aggies. Nick Saban loses his first game ever to a previous predecessor or assistant that he has worked with.